Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and today we have a very special guest with us from LA, who's an author of a prize-winning book, Alicia, My Story, and we have Alicia Appelman-Yurman with us, visiting us from in the Capital District, and wrote a book, and it's really a biography of her story that she survived miraculously, we may say, through the Holocaust. Welcome to the Jewish View, Alicia.
Shalom, Rabbi Simon.
Well, let's get to the story. You have such a big story, and it's such a beautiful book and award-winning, as we said. Tell us a little bit about, just as we can in the short time that's allotted to us on this program, a little bit about what you experienced, unfortunately, through the Holocaust.
This is an autobiographical book, and I'm telling it from the age of 5 when I was a little girl living with my family in Poland. And then in 1939, when Second World War started, I was 9 years old, and my part of Poland was invaded by the Russians, because the Russians and the Germans both invaded Poland. And then I tell the story about what happened during the Russian occupation. One of my brothers died during that time. And then in 1941, the Germans came in after they broke the peace treaty with Russia, and they came into my hometown. And when our tragedy started all over again.
Well, tell us a little bit about your hometown and in Poland, and how many people there were, and how many Jewish people were, and a little bit how they experienced it right when they, let's say, it's just unfortunate people so many times didn't know the Russians invaded and the Germans invaded. It was just like little pawns in the history of those times.
Buchach was a very lovely town. Those who are familiar with Shai Agnon know he writes about Buchach, but he doesn't use the word Buchach, he uses the word Bechuch or Chibuch. We had about 80,000 people, which 18,000 were Jewish people, and the rest were Ukrainian and Polish people. We children, of course, went to the regular school, but in the afternoon, we went to Hebrew school. We all spoke Hebrew. 3 hours every day I learned how to read and write Hebrew. I learned about Jewish traditions. And when I think back of all the gifts my parents gave to me, as you, dear listeners, try to give to your children, this was the greatest gift my parents gave me, is the strong Jewish identity. Because later on, when the Germans came and the Ukrainians and Poles and tried to tell us Jewish children that we are not human beings, we are subhuman, we just don't deserve to live, to me they just sounded like raving maniacs. I knew at all times who I was, a very proud Jewish girl from a fine home, belonging to a people who, dating back thousands of years. And then, of course, when the Germans came in, I was 11 years old at the time. And the first thing they did, they asked all Jewish men from the age of 18 to 20 to 50 to come to the registration. My father fell under that age category. He went to the registration, but he never came home. They took 600 leading citizens from my hometown and massacred them in the open graves. Later on, 3 days later, they asked for ransom for the people, and we paid ransom, but the people never came back. In 1967, the German consul in Los Angeles asked me to come to testify against one of the murders of the 600 men, and I did testify against him.
It's interesting for our audience. I mean, a lot of times there's revisionist history, or it's something put in the back burner. Now it's 50 years after the Holocaust. I think it's just important to, if unfortunate to say, to relive, but just these unfortunate circumstances that these were human beings. Sometimes we talk numbers, 6 million and million children, and numbers don't tell us that each of those numbers was a human being, and just like us, and with our own feelings, and that's why it's good to, like in the flesh and blood, to someone who did survive, one of the few, unfortunately, again, the few survived, but it's important that you tell your story. So tell us a little bit about this book. Again, it's Alicia, My Story, and you do go around, and you are here in the Capital District now, but you do go around and you're telling your story through your book and how it's received, and like what's your goal in talking about the Holocaust to many audience. And of course, we're the Jewish View. It's a Jewish educational audience, but Are you speaking to Jewish people or other people?
97% of my listeners are not Jewish people. And I speak all over the country. I travel to Canada as well. I don't charge for my presentation. The schools usually get the books directly from Bentham. I just want the children to know who we were. Because when you speak in terms of 6 million people, you see 6 million, but in my book, you recognize that there were beautiful children like my brother Zachary who fought back, Milek who was a brave boy, my brother Herzl, my brother Bunyo, my parents. I want the world to know that we had dreams and that we have gifts and that we died so cruelly. But most of all, I want the students in the classrooms to learn that they too have strength within themselves to use in time of need. And this is what the children are finding out. They read this book, it's very much loved. It's written in a very simple language. The power is in the story. And they identify with these lovely children in my book. And even today, children need heroes. And they always love Zachary and Milek, and to some extent they love me too.
And you are well received and they can relate to the non-Jewish audience?
So, very much so. I remember I was speaking in Marysville in one of the schools, and I was autographing books for the children. The teacher had them, and most of the children were of Mexican descent. And as I was autographing books, I heard somebody going, I turned around and there was a 10-year-old boy crying. And I asked him, son, why are you crying? And he says, my book, what's going to happen to my book? My mother didn't have the money to give me for my book. What's going to happen to it? And so I asked him, is it okay if I buy you a book? And so I bought him a book, and the child took this book to his heart. And then I nearly broke down and cried myself, because was a child who never heard about Jews, doesn't know. But this was his book. Because all these children, I mean, this is their book. This is where they learn to have strength and they have courage. And also they learn that children can be committed to the survival of their parents just the way we children were in the ghetto. And it's very much loved. I get letters from all over the world, and sometimes I cry because I'm so deeply touched by the outpouring of love for the children in my book by people who have many times never even heard the word Jew.
Again, the message of Alicia, your story, of course, your own personal story, is a universal idea. Like as you're saying there, you're speaking to non-Jews and they are taking it to heart. What message would you like them to come out with? I mean, when you're talking to them, of course, like I said, there's basic information that the Holocaust did happen, and today a little bit just to teach history isn't, not a worthwhile idea, because people just should know that it really did happen. There's so many events in the world, and then 50 years, even though if it was such a catastrophic calamity to the Jewish people and to humanity, still, 50 years later, it just is relegated to like a half a page in a 1,000-page history book. But besides that, like, what are telling to these American kids what they want to feel were the lessons they should learn out of this history?
What I'm telling them mainly that we cannot be indifferent to the plight of other people, that we have to be very respectful to people's religions, to people's races, that everyone in this country has the right to live with dignity. Only then can we really be free and be strong. If we don't care what happens to another minority, this country doesn't have a chance of survival. Indifference is an illness, because when we were dying, the world knew what was happening to us. They were indifferent. But we cannot be indifferent to the plight of any children in the world. We must help them. This is one message, that the children must know that they have to care about this country, care about each other, be respectful to people's religions and to people's races. This is extremely important. And also, the message to them as people, I want the children to know that they can be very loving, the way we were in the ghetto, protective of their parents. They can be great strength to their parents, just the way we were. And mainly that they don't always have to focus on themselves. If they have problems, they can go up to another friend and say, hey, can I help you? And then their problems don't look so big. It's a relationship. Actually, this book is a love story between children and parents, between brothers and sisters, between friends to friends. And the time of darkness, how children can shine like little stars. See, I call the children in my ghetto the little stars from the kingdom of darkness, because they really left us a beautiful light, a light of love and a light of devotion of children to the survival of the parents. You see, they didn't give us food in the ghetto, so the children went out to the market and tried to get food for their parents. Many of them were caught and many of them died. Very heroic children. So when the children who read this book, or young people or students at universities, they find themselves with a tragic story, but yet the whole story celebrates young people, celebrates life. This is what I wanted to know, that young people are a celebration of life, our future.
Well, I think it's very noble. Always, unfortunately, I see people like yourself, and you just have to. I mean, I think it's unimaginable. You can't even imagine that there's 1 million children that died in youth, just like yourself, at the time of the Holocaust, and how much they would have given to the world and humanity. And I don't think the world will ever really understand that loss. And I will never be able to really understand how many things that they could have given to the world around us, and would have been probably, I'm sure, a lot better world for in every aspect of it. This, Alicia, is interesting to me, and I'd like just to ask you about this, is just that, the Holocaust happened, and, like I said, that itself is a lesson. But just, there's people today that really don't understand that, like, what hatred will bring around. I mean, people, like I said about the revisionist, and I think that's, how are you feeling about that, that people are becoming more aware, that, like you say, that through their efforts, that people are becoming more sympathetic to other peoples. There's just so much, I'm saying, there's so much hatred around us still. It's amazing that people haven't learned the lesson. Maybe we can say it that way after Holocaust, after killing people. Maybe they don't understand the Holocaust. Again, it's like numbers, or it was something that was swept under the carpet. And today we have also, it's just so hard to understand that there's starving people, and people shouldn't be killing each other. I don't know if the lesson has been learned, surely not to the fullest extent.
I do meet people, and I am aware of the revisionists. When this is a case of a professor who wrote a book denying that the Holocaust ever happened, I tell the students, and that's mostly at universities, that this is a very poor excuse of a writer, poor excuse of a professor who will be paid for lies. But when I have young children, like I had a 12-year-old girl came to me and she says, Alicia, I heard that the Holocaust never happened. So I ask her simply, I say, sweetheart, do you have a mother? She says, yes. Do you have a father? She says, yes. Do you have brothers and sisters? She says, yes. So I say to her, you don't have them. She says, what do you mean I don't have them? That's crazy. I say, sweetheart, this is the same way you tell me that I didn't have a mother, didn't have a father, didn't have brothers. It's crazy, right? Suddenly she begins thinking. I say, hey, this denial isn't just the denial of a Holocaust, it's denial to people who survived, denying that I ever had parents, and I did have parents. So she realized that all of this, whatever she heard, wasn't true. And I tried to personally make them realize that the Holocaust did happen. But Rabbi, I believe in the half-filled cup, not the half empty. Because if people are denying something so very strongly, people are going to be curious, what is being denied? And so, every cloud has a silver lining, so I think to myself, well, all this denial surfaces the Holocaust to people's attention. Maybe this is, part of it.
Well, of course, with your book also, like you say, you're the best testimony that it did happen. You're an eyewitness, to say the least, a personal person in this. But this is what I think is so important, the book also. You should live till 120 with all the entire Jewish people, but, ultimately there won't be this first-hand opportunity, and they at least have this book to understand really what people had to go through. I just want to say, many times I see that your book is compared to, in a way, the new Anne Frank. Like, here's a story of a young girl growing up in the midst of the Holocaust. And again, I don't know if, especially in American youth, everybody has it so well, and they can understand how, troops coming in and denigrating yourself and your person and your family, ultimately torturing and killing people. It is a good testimony for the world just to understand what you've gone through.
it complements Anne Frank. Very often the students will tell me, Alicia, I read Anne Frank, and now I read your book, and I get a good picture. Then I recommend for them to read Night by Elie Wiesel as well, because that really rounds it up. You have 3 books written by young people. Anne Frank was a wonderful writer and a wonderful young lady. She was more stationary, and her feelings were around what was happening right there in her own area. Now, I was not in a camp, as you know. I was too young to be in a camp. I was on a train. I was thrown out of a train. I was 11 years old at the time, and I was caught in these actions. So I was turning with the wheels of these misfortunes. I was caught 6 times. My life was in danger. Twice people saved me. Once they threw me out of a train, and once they actually took me out of a grave, because I was being buried alive. And so on 2 occasions people saved me, 4 occasions I saved myself. But I was 3 times at the graves. And so I have seen children, I have seen how brave children can be. Rabbi, I have seen the bravest people in the world, and I have seen them at the graves. Their dignity. I have seen bravery, and I was a soldier in the Israeli Navy, in the Israel Palmach and Palyam during World War, during the War of Independence, but I have never seen such brave people as those at the graves. Their dignity was up. I don't describe it in my book. I left them their dignity. But they will always live in my heart as somebody to really look up to.
That's why I understand that. You know, you have 6 million people, and each one has really their own story, and it's important that, I mean, I know it's so difficult for yourself, and again, I just keep on saying I can't even sympathize, because I say it's like I think it's unimaginable. I can't imagine what it would really be, as much as you can read all the books about the Holocaust, and you can have the knowledge about it, but the real face-to-face danger, I don't know if anybody really can accept that and really realize that. And that's why it's important that your story does get out to people, because I'm sure it was so traumatic for you to bring out old unfortunate tragedies
Yeah,
into your life.
tears me apart each time I tell it. But when my brother was hung, my brother organized a resistance group. He was caught and he was hung. And when we buried him at the cemetery, I swore on his grave that if I lived, I will tell his story. And I have literally dedicated my life to telling the story. And each time my heart tears all over, but I also know that I have to keep my promise to my brother. And thank God that I am able to do that. And it's most amazing, Rabbi, think about it, that the children today are learning about us 50 years ago, and they're learning with such love, and we are helping them in their times of need, because being young and growing up is painful. And very often I hear students write to me, I get thousands of letters, and say, Alicia, when I read Zachary's story and I had my problems, I could have took strength from him. Or sometimes they say, if you could do it, Alicia, I can do it. And so this is what makes me feel so humble, realizing that here are children who died such a tragic death, and bringing this kind of strength to the generation of today. It must only be God guiding this kind of faith.
Let's only live with miracles. I think there's so many people in the world that just don't understand that even the goodness. And I think that's important for children in their own right, to say that everything is just not so natural and everything good that happens, because there's people who do suffer, and it's important that this lesson comes out in the Holocaust to the Jewish people also. It's important for everybody. Like you say, I mean, you talk to most non-Jews, you're saying, and I think there is a universal message, because humanity was here to live amongst each other and to be good to each other. It's just amazing, like you have an advanced society, as Germany was at that time, and could perpetuate such destruction. Do you have any really feelings upon that? I mean, probably better than me, about the advanced societies, and yet that they could use all their knowledge and
this was the whole tragedy, because people couldn't believe that people like the Germans would commit such crimes. Maybe they could believe that the Cossacks could do it, but not the Germans. our people in our area knew the Germans from World War I. When there was an Austrian-Hungarian Empire, they considered them kind and friendly. They never feared them. And so when all these rumors reached us, people could not accept these rumors. It was, even my father was born in Austria, he couldn't accept it. It was unacceptable. And this was one of the tragedies, because people couldn't believe that the Germans could do it. The Germans of all people would commit such crimes. And that was the tragedy.
Well, I see that people just to learn the science and all their advanced technology is not enough.
It is not enough. You have to have a conscience. You have to have respect for life. And most of all, you have to realize, even if your government, that the people in a country, when they see that their government is cruel and killers, they can object that they don't have to participate. And when I speak to the children in the schools, I tell them, I say, you have to vote in the people in the government who will look out for the interests of all of the Americans. It is impossible that this government would be racist or anti-Semitic, because then the country can easily be destroyed. I make them aware of what happens when anti-Semitism and racism reaches the government, and they allow speakers who speak with anger, with hate, on television, on the radio, allow people like that to speak in the name of the government and incite people to hatred, because hatred is a disease. It destroys people and it destroys the country. So we have to be very careful about it.
Do you ever meet like Germans, young Germans, and tell them about their history?
I met a young man. I was speaking in Los Alamos in New Mexico. I spoke to about 1,200 students, high schoolers. And after I had a question and answer period, a young man stood up with red hair and green eyes. He says, Alicia, I'm a German. What message do you have for me? And so I told him, first of all, I told him, I don't hate you. I don't hate anybody. I would never forgive or forget, never. But I don't hate because for simple reason hatred would destroy me. But the only thing I tell you is that you have to face that page in history. You simply cannot ignore it. It existed. Your ancestors did commit heinous crimes. You have to face it with courage, acknowledge it. And once you face it with courage and acknowledge it, then the chances are that your generation will not write such a painful and shameful page in history. And even now, what is happening in Germany, the young people must protest. Why should they be ashamed? Why should they have to be blamed for another Holocaust, for women being burned and children being burned? They have to stand up and say, we are not going to have this repeat again. They must, if they have courage. And they should have courage. After all, what is a page in history if we cannot learn from it? If we don't learn from it, it will be repeated. Maybe this what's happening in Germany is telling the young German generation, we have to face it. They must face it.
You cannot sweep it under the carpet. It's
No.
just not going to go away. These things have to be taught. They have to be trained, and they have to realize what's really happening. You see, that's what I say today. You can't just say, well, Holocaust happened, I guess everybody learned their lesson. Well, what is that? That's not automatic that they learned their lesson. 6 million people died for nothing and for just because of hatred. It's not automatic that they learned a lesson. That's why I say your story is so important. It's again, it's one story of 6 million stories.
Thank you, Rabbi. You're very kind.
But it's important to be educated, and it's important for the Jewish people, for themselves, because that they should really understand what the Holocaust did. People just don't know history. I think it's just almost as simple as that, and they should understand this chapter in Jewish history for sure, and the people around them. We have to get along with each other. There's billions of people on the earth, and just can't go around with these feelings. And the technology, again, and just to know that they have their computer systems is not going to ensure them that, oh, now we're so sophisticated, we're better than animals. What animal has a computer in their home? That doesn't mean that they're going to be the righteous people that God made on this world, and they have to be trained. Nothing is automatic. And your story, I really think, is so important, and it's important that few people, and I do appreciate in that sense that digging up and tearing your heart every time you do tell your story, and you tell it like hundreds of times, you told in your book, you go to different audiences, but you're doing it for such a good cause that people should learn. And that's really the best testament that you can make to to the 6 million, including your family, that they should be able to, people should learn from it. At least that's what they would want to also. At least it shouldn't happen again, and people should understand that the problems and of what man can do to man. And
Right, that is the issue.
And
I would also like to explain to the parents, since I speak to so many children and they write to me, the children, when they read a Holocaust book, they are not afraid to read this Holocaust book. They take from it what they want. And the parents must trust their children and not be afraid to let them read a Holocaust book or come to the lecture of a Holocaust speaker. The children will take out of it what they can, the rest they will leave behind. But for them not to know is worse than for them to read a sad story. They must know that page in history belongs to them. Because in that page of history, they will find not only horrors, but they will find love, they will find belief in God, and they will find heroism, very often committed by children their age, so they can identify. It's very important that the parents should trust their children and let them read the books.
That's interesting that, many people I know do have those kind of feelings that it's too tender. I don't want to protect my children, but I think children could understand and grasp, even probably more than the adults in a lot of senses. But this is a difficult book. I mean, maybe difficult for somebody maybe under, 10 years old or 8 years old.
Yeah, from 10 years old, the children can read it. And they're reading it from 10 years.
And what about the smaller children?
The smaller children, I wrote another little story called 6 Cherry Blossoms, and it's allegory to the Holocaust, and they can read this. But from the age of 10, I think this is a very good time for them to read and understand. And you know what's so amazing? This book has 426 pages, and 10-year-olds are reading it twice. Yeah. Very often in schools, they will come up to me and say, Alicia, I never finished the book, but I finished your book twice already. And the parents will come up to me sometimes, and they, like in Alabama, one mother came up to me and says, my son never finished the book, but he's reading your book the 3rd time. Even I'm stunned.
Yeah. That was good literature. That's why the schools wanted this.
It flows. The language is very easy, because I'm writing with the language that a 5th grader would write. But the story is powerful. It's a powerful story.
I think that's not the means.
But it's not really tragic in a sense. It's tragic, but yet later when you finished, you have more love for your mother and father because you appreciate them more. Parents, this is a family book. Parents will read it and they look at their children with different eyes. They say, hey, these children are really God-given gift. It changes families. I know when I spoke in Utah, I spoke with the Mormon people already 11 times. And I spoke in Utah, and I was hosted by a family, and the mother came up to me when I was there the 2nd time. She says to me, Alicia, since you stayed in our home, my relationship with my daughter has increased, has improved so greatly. We really love each other after we realized what we could lose if we didn't love each other.
There's so much to talk about, Alicia, but the show's coming to an end. Thank you very much, and I want to just invite our listening audience really to read such a tremendous book. I think this is required reading. Sometimes I say, well, it's good if you can get a hold of it, and to this book I don't say it's good if you get a hold of it. You get a hold of it, and it's either in the hardcover, and Alicia just said she prefers even the printing in the 10th edition already, the soft cover, because then it's like everybody is accessible for a small price, that they can read any paperback and either get it that or get out of the library. In this way they can read it, and it's like, say, it's for family reading. It's for the parents and the children, and it's not just, like you were saying, just horror stories of Holocaust, but they should know what the Holocaust is historically, but just know that the love between parents and between people could really as we see in the Holocaust, that survives, and it's the hatred that eventually dissipates, and it's the love between people, and it's the caring that really is the thing that's eternal. So I want to thank you very, very, very much. I know it's such a busy schedule. You talk around the country, and just taking out a period of time to talk to our viewing audience on the Jewish View. Thank you very much, Alicia.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, listeners, and shalom.